Hi, this is Luke Turner, back with episode 3 of Building an Exercise Tracker web app from scratch. Before we actually get started on working on the app, a couple pieces of administrivia here. I got a new mic, hopefully sounds a little bit better. I also have switched my streaming setup a fair bit so that I have a monitor dedicated to my work here. So if I actually Alt-Tab between windows, I don't have to switch to scenes in OBS. So we shouldn't be having that problem anymore where I forget to switch to scenes. Also, I have adjusted my streaming settings. The encoding settings seem to have been set up for actually recording, not streaming in OBS Studio. So that should be fixed. Hopefully I won't be dropping frames like a madman anymore. Okay, with that, let's actually get started on the app. So I did make one little change in the meantime here. If we go to my GitHub profile settings, developer settings, OAuth apps, I've created an exercise tracker OAuth app here in GitHub. And I wanted to do this off stream just because I didn't want to actually share my secret. And then if we switch back to VS Code here, I have put that secret, the client ID, which is not a secret in .env, and the actual secret in this .env.local file. So I'm just going to try and avoid clicking on that. And with that, we should actually be able to use Github OAuth as an OAuth provider instead of using username password when people log into our app. So let's actually get started here and run dev. Get this launched. And then over here, localhost 3000. Is that not the... Oh, we got an error. Oh yeah, this is telling me that I need to start the database. So let's go ahead and do that. Gonna launch Podman. Let's move Podman over here. Wait for the containers to appear, and then we can run run db start. And then we can start our actual server. And now we should be able to load the page. Awesome. Okay, so previously, as a reminder, we have these things where you can fill in a username, email, and password. I don't remember the exact order because I didn't actually put labels on the fields. And log in. And this is using the better-auth library. There's a few problems with this type of login, though. Email and password login. For starters, as I'm building and testing the app, it's just kind of annoying to have to come up with a new username and email and password in order to log in to create an account. Whereas with something like GitHub auth login, because I'm already logged into GitHub in this browser window, it would basically just be a matter of clicking the button, getting myself logged in. Nice and simple. The other reason that I want to switch to using GitHub is email and password login is easy for people to create with a bot account. So if I publish this app online, which of course I plan to do, and people can just use any old email and password to log in, that encourages people, I'm not going to have a CAPTCHA on there or anything necessarily, or I don't want to have to go through the trouble of adding that. And so people could log in with any old email and password. I could do email verification to prove that there's a chain of ownership there, which would make it harder for bots to actually log in or to create bot accounts or whatever you would call it. But that's kind of a pain in and of itself, because to do email verification, of course, you have to configure your app to be able to send emails. And I have done that before. I actually have used this provider, I believe it's called Migadu, to send emails from an app. And it works pretty well, but it is a pain to set up. So if we can avoid that, that would be great. And that's kind of why I'm going to be switching to using the GitHub auth. Now, if I really wanted to encourage as many people as possible to use this app, either because I wanted to make money from it or just because I want a lot of people to use it, I would really be well advised to choose both of these to enable email and password with the email sending functionality to verify email ownership, also to provide GitHub and also some other popular OAuth providers, maybe like Google, maybe Apple, Microsoft. I don't really know if those even have easy to use OAuth providers at all, but basically Google would be a big one to add. But I'm not going to do that, at least not yet, because the point of this app is not to get a lot of users. The point is to build it, to learn new tools, and to share the process of building it with y'all. Okay, so let's actually just go ahead and try to do this now. This is kind of like the next step. So email and password enabled, false. Social providers. So we're getting some TypeScript errors here, telling us that it's possible that these environment variables are not defined, which is fair. Now, what we could do is put an exclamation point here, which is essentially telling TypeScript these are defined. It's like a type hint or a type cast or whatever you'd like to call it. And that will fix the type error. But maybe a better option would be something like if we could say, you know, basically I'm thinking conditionally enable this provider if these things are set. That would sort of be the ideal. I'm not actually going to do that though, because I don't really know how that works with better-auth. And it's going to be easier to just assume that they're set and have things fail if they're not. Okay. So with that, we should be able to update our view to use this new login method. And so this is calling the signup function on exercise tracker. If we go over to auth.js, we can see what that function is doing. It's using authclient.signup.email. So we don't want this to be .email anymore. What do we want it to be? Do we get IntelliSense here? No, we do not. So let's look at the better-auth docs. Okay, basic usage. Skip the email. So let's look at the social sign-on approach. So with this, it's going to be signin.social. And I'm actually just going to copy this and paste it over here. Get rid of all of that. And this is .social. The provider GitHub is already correct. The callback URL can just be / since we don't even have any other pages yet. This can be like that and like that. Yeah. Save. Get rid of the comment. Okay. And then there can be a sign out button as well. Let's actually go ahead and define a function for this as well. And you know, one thing I kind of want to try here, I've been intending to use more Copilot. Let's see how well it works. So sign out, it's doing authclient.signout. It's not passing in a redirect, But actually looking at the way that this redirect works, it seems to be using some kind of router that we don't even have. So let's not worry about that. Don't really need the console.logs. Let's see. Actually, can I undo that, I wonder? Yeah, let's just keep them in there for now. Accept. And then down here, this goes more like that. Yeah. Okay, and the other thing is we want to rename this one to sign in. And when you're dealing with like a social provider like this, the distinction between sign up and sign in doesn't exist. So we don't need to have a separate sign up function and then another function for signing in. We just have one function to sign in. And if the user has not signed in before, they'll get prompted with some stuff. And if they have been signed in before, they won't. And if we look up here, yeah, so this actually should be sign in on the auth client as well. And don't need to return anything here, I guess. Don't need to log anything. Don't need to pass any parameters. So much simpler. And then over here, don't need to pass any parameters. And I'm going to call this sign in. And then these, we don't need either. Let's just delete those for now. We can call this sign in with GitHub. And so now, well, let's see what's going to happen. Open up the app, sign in with GitHub. Did it do anything? Type error, exercise tracker.signin is not a function. Is it not? Oh, that, gotta fix that. Okay. Now, let's try it. Refresh. And click. What's the problem now? So this is still saying that's not a function. But I'm pretty confident that is a function there. Oh, I remember. This is the problem with going a week between working on the apps. Okay, let's make a new thing here, a new terminal tab. And we need to actually run this client dev command as well. So let's do that. Bun run client dev. And so this is actually going to recompile that TypeScript or JavaScript file. I suppose it's not actually compiling it because the file is JavaScript to begin with, but it's bundling it for the browser. Basically what was happening before, we updated this JavaScript code and that updates automatically. But the exercise tracker object that exports from here does not get updated automatically unless we have this other thing running. Probably I should just make one command that runs both of those, but we don't need to worry about that yet. So now I click sign in with GitHub and I get a nice message from GitHub. It's going to read my personal user data, email address, authorize, and boom. In theory now I'm signed in. Now we can't actually tell that I'm signed in though, because there's no difference in the page that's rendered based on whether somebody's signed in or not. And here's where we need to actually update our server-side code a little bit to get that user record and pass it to the front end so that we can adjust, or not even necessarily pass it to the front end, but change the way that our template rendering works at the very least. So let's see, server side. let's pop over here to Hono. Hono is like a fancy new framework. It's pretty dang similar to Express. And basically what seems to be saying is we can get the session by parsing our headers. And this is something that eventually we're going to want to do in a middleware, presumably, because for every request we want to run this logic of check if there's a session, parse it out. But for now, we're just going to put it right here and see how this works. And this is going to be rec.headers, I believe. And let's see what we get. If we refresh the page now, refresh, failed to get session. Yeah, so it's just not happy with the Express headers stuff. So let's see if we can read a little bit more specifically if it has anything to say about using it with Express. This is interesting because it calls it a node integration, but it's talking about Express here. So I guess this is what we want to use anyway. So I guess maybe the lesson here is that Express uses the same headers format as the node HTTP API, and so we're using from node headers here. Or something like that. Who knows? Okay, so now if we log the session, we should get something that then we can base some of our logic on. Okay, so see we have a session here. It's an object with session and user. So like this could be session user, like so. But it's complaining about that because this is possibly going to be null. Okay, so let's actually put this into a middleware to make it a little bit easier. I wonder, I'm kind of curious to see how this works with Copilot. Extract the get session call into middleware. Move it to an app.u call. Well, whatever. It's not putting it in the right place, but it wrote the code. So we've got request response next. And I don't really like how it did this, actually. Use async await. Okay, so now we have this async function, and what it's doing is getting the user. And so this we're going to need to be session data. If session data, then we populate these. And this would be session data dot user. Okay, so basically what we're saying here is we're getting a session. if we have a session, then we assign that to the request. And the way that Express works, this request data is basically going to be available then in the controllers. So we can see in the controllers if we have a session or not. And then if we don't have a session, we don't assign anything. And then if we run into an error, we call the next callback with an error, which then triggers a whole error handling pathway. And hopefully not having a session doesn't trigger an error. Seems like it should be okay. Let's give this a shot now. So if we refresh the page, it's spinning, not necessarily the best sign. What's going on over here? Can't find variable session. Oh yes, of course. So this would be, let's actually log rec.user. Cool. So here we actually get the user logged. This information is coming from GitHub. This is my GitHub email, GitHub picture, presumably, GitHub name, and then this ID, I believe, is specific to my app. It's sort of like the ID of this account in my app. And so as an example here, if we go, let's see if I can get this working. I seem to recall I had a bit of trouble with Table Plus. Go away. Local. Yeah, what don't you like about this? Menu, connection, edit. Save, connect. Postgres is the user, foobar is the password. Very strange. Postgres is the user, foobar is the password. Connection is okay. That is fine. Save. So now if I edit this, see how it's got, like, what is going on with that? It's not the right number of characters. What if I do that and do connect? That works. So for some reason, it's not actually saving the updated password in the keychain, seems like. At least we understand why it wasn't working, even if it doesn't really make sense. Then we should be able to see, yeah. So in the public schema, we have an account. ID HCP. Is that in here somewhere? User ID HCP. And so that's tied to this user here. And we can see some of those test users that I created last time. Those really could just be deleted. But I'm not actually going to do that because it would be a bit of a pain and it doesn't need to happen. Okay, so now we can kind of see how that is working. So let's actually pass this user. We could do something like const user equals rec. If, well, we don't even really need an if at the moment. First, let's just pass the user into the template. Now in the template, we can be let's see. If there is a user show log out sign out instead of sign in. How are you going to do it this, Copilot? pretty much what I was thinking too. So now if we go over here, refresh the page, we see a sign out button instead of a sign in. If I go ahead and click that, I guess I need to refresh the page again after that because I'm not redirecting anywhere. Then I get a sign in button. If I click sign in, it redirects me here again. That time it actually did a redirect because it has to go through the little flow. Cool. So now we have basic authentication set up for our app. I'm going to pause for a moment and just check on the stream really fast. Seems like it's looking pretty good here. How's my frames? My frames are good? Awesome. Okay. So now we have sign out and sign in, but we don't actually have any functionality in the app at all yet. And in fact, we don't even really know exactly what functionality we want to build into the app yet. So let's take a moment and think about that. So for starters, when the user is not logged in, we probably want to show a kind of home page, right? So let's actually split out this. Let's see if Copilot can do this. Split or split header into a pug template. Or maybe I'll say extract header into a pug template. Is it going to work in multiple files? Seems like it doesn't really understand what I'm asking. So let's just do it ourselves. So if we make a new file here, we can call it underscore template.pug. I think something like that should work. Just copy this whole thing, paste it over here. And instead of the body, we're going to have just something. Let's take a look at the pug docs here. Pug, yeah, pug templating language. Click. And we're going to be doing includes, not includes. We want inheritance. And so this is going to be, looks like block is the keyword here. So this would be like block content, say. And then in the thing that does the thing, we're going to extend this. So all of this can actually go away. We're going to extend underscore layout.pug. And then we're going to declare the body block, or the content block, I mean, like so. And so now, if we look back here, it should look the same. Oh, no, we get an error. So this is not happy with my, oh, well, that's because it's called underscore template. I'm going to actually rename this to underscore layout because we might, after all, have some different types of templates. This way, it's named for what it's used for, laying out the page. Okay, so now this works. And now we can reuse that layout to make a new page. Let's make one called Well, now we need to think about what we want the user to see a little bit when they're logged in. When the user's not logged in, as we talked about, they're just going to see a home page. That's going to be our index.bug. When the user is logged in, we're probably going to want to render a totally different template. Now we could use the same template and just have like an if user and then put all of the stuff for if the user's logged in and then all of the stuff for if the user's logged out. But I think it's going to be better in the long run to have separate template files. So we're going to do something like, let's say, a daily exercise view. Let's just call it daily.pug. And this is what the user is going to see when they're logged in by default. And so this, we already have this list of exercises. We can just leave that for now. Let's get rid of that message. And this part here as well, we're actually going to put into the template. Or the layout, I should say. So in the body, we can make, say, like nav, I believe, will work fine. And then in there, we can put this. And we're not really going to worry about styling this stuff yet. Usually, when I do style my front-end code, I like to pull in a CSS framework instead of actually writing all that CSS by hand. I know that there's some popular things like Tailwind, where it's more of like an atomic CSS approach, and I have no problem with that. But the reason that I prefer to use a more component-oriented framework is just because it's easier to get up and running quickly. To use a quick example here of what I'm talking about, Bulma is a CSS framework that I've used in the past. Get away with you. And basically what this lets you do is use classes that describe kind of the semantics of the div or whatever, and then it automatically gets styled in a way that's consistent and, you know, fits the theme of the whole app. And like, as you can see here, you can choose dark mode and automatically all of the components will shift to dark mode. If we actually look at the components, this CSS library, we can see like there's a lot of different things that you can easily include in your app without having to style them yourself. Things like notifications. You know, in this particular case, we're working on a nav, and there's actually a nav bar style that we could use to make something that looks like this, that fits at the top of the page. And so when I'm using this nav div, or, you know, this nav element to put in the sign in button, I'm kind of picturing something like this in the long run. But I'm not actually going to pull in Bulma quite yet, just because don't need to, don't want to get too distracted. So that's why we have our nav here actually in the layout. So this is going to show up on every page. And I'm going to actually get rid of the with GitHub part of sign in. Well, no, I'll leave that. It's nice to be explicit about what people are doing when they click on it. So now if we refresh the page here, we've got sign out. And if you click that, I'm actually going to fix this redirect issue. So when this sign out happens, it seems like there's a redirect property on here. Yes, I wonder if that could actually be used. Like if I type definition, lovely type definition here. What in the world? What I want to see is this request redirect type definition. Well, let's see if Copilot can help me. Redirect to slash if the user or after sign out. That's a little bit of garbage. I don't think that will even work here at all. So not sure where it gets that from. Yeah. Not super happy. So let's take a look over here. We'll have to actually look at the API proper. This should have API reference. Yes. That's not really what I want. I want the front end API reference. Sign out. Doesn't really have anything to say. I do find that a little bit annoying when things have types, you know, they're probably just assuming that I'm using the types, but like, why can't you actually document what all of these things do? Well, whatever. What we can do, presumably, is just redirect the user here. That's something we know how to do, right? We can do window.location equals slash, I think. Or window.location.path name equals slash. And so then if we go over here, refresh, if we sign in, we're signed in. If we sign out, we're signed out. And we just got redirected to exactly the same page. But because of the redirect, you know, if we look in the network tab here, we actually reload the page when we click sign out. And because of that reload, it properly updates the state. Now you could imagine something where if we don't want to have to redirect the user at all, our JavaScript code on the client could intelligently be like, oh, hey, we're now signed out. Let's switch some kind of state, you know, a data star model or whatever it is, a signal, I think they call it. But we're not going to do that because we're trying to focus on using the express server-side rendering. And so this works a lot better. And besides, we're actually probably going to eventually redirect these to totally different pages. Like, let's, for instance, have this callback URL be today. And I'm going to rename this to today. And then in the index here, we're going to make a new route. And this is going to be slash today. This is going to be for logged in users. And I'm going to get rid of this because we don't really need that anymore. That was sort of just for testing purposes. And this is going to render the today view. And it's going to have the title, can just be today for now. Ultimately, this might be something like the actual date, but we're not going to worry about that quite yet. This title, after all, just gets rendered into the title here. Message, we don't need. Exercise, we don't need. User, we do need. In fact, we need to make sure to pass in this user in every call to render. I wonder if there's some easy way to do that in the actual middleware here. Like, let's see, if we look at express.js, and we want to talk about guide using templating engines. Well, actually, let's see, we want something more like guide, getting started. Not seeing any good examples here. So what we can always do is have kind of a standard object on the request that we always have to remember to pass into render. But I kind of would like it if I didn't have to remember to do that. But whatever. For now, this is fine. Okay, so now we have our two pages, our index page and our today page, and they're both extending the layout. And we could call this today. And this doesn't need to be a thing. So now, if we're over here, refresh, we should be able to sign in. And we're redirected to today. And then if we sign out, we're redirected back home. So now we have our basic sign in, sign out flow. And if a user is signed out and they go to today without having a session, then what happens? You can see they're actually allowed to do that, and there's still a sign in button. So this is something we need to fix now. This route should perform a check on whether or not we have an authenticated user. And if we do, then it can render, right? If we don't, it should redirect back to the home page. So that's something that we're going to want to add here, probably as a reusable middleware. Let's actually take this, abstract this out of the home page. So in this auth, seems like a decent place. I'm going to export const get session middleware equals this. And then we need to import these things again. Okay. And then we're also going to have something which is export const require session or redirect. And what this middleware is going to do is it's going to say, well, let's just go ahead and write it out. So if not rec.user, then redirect, redirect to the home page. Simple enough. And don't know exactly how, let's see what Express has to say about doing server-side redirects. Pretty sure there's a way to do that. It would be probably the request or the response, I guess. Response.redirect. Yep. So this would be res.redirect to the home page. And then we need to start actually using these middlewares in our index. So this is going to be get session middleware. And then we're also going to put in here the require session or redirect middleware. And with Express, I believe this works where you can basically just put the middlewares right into the route declaration like this. We could also have a separate router for authenticated login only. And let's actually do it that way too, just for demonstration purposes and future proofness and so on. Authenticated router equals app.router or something. Let's see, app.router. No, that's app.route. Maybe it's express.router. Express.router. And so then the authenticated router can use .use require session or redirect. And then this would go into the authenticated router instead of the app. And then the app .use authenticated router, I believe. Let's see how this works. We go over here. If we refresh, we got redirected to the home page. We try to go to today, we get redirected to the home page. Seems great. If we sign in, we actually can get into today. Awesome. So now we have a kind of authorization around these routes. You can't actually visit certain routes unless you have an authenticated session. Cool. So now we need to think about, let's say, listing all of the exercises for the given user is maybe a good next step. So actually, well, yeah, that's fine. There is some cleanup stuff I want to do, but I'm not going to worry about that quite yet. So if we want to get all exercises for a given user, we need to actually associate the exercises to a user in the database. And then this association is going to be the basis for our authorization SQL queries, if that makes sense. So here we would do something like user. And this is going to be a text user ID, not null, references, user.id. And, I actually just copied this right from down here. So hopefully that's the way to do it. So having added that, we now need to generate and then run a new migration. So we can start by migration generate. And I seem to recall that I wanted to put like a name, add user to exercise. So now we have this migration file that's generated, and let's take a look at what this is actually doing. So first we're adding a column, user ID, text not null. And kind of just a little note here, in Postgres, we're using text, which is, potentially an unbounded size quantity of text. It's not like a varchar type where you're limited to, say, 64 characters or something like that. In theory, this could easily be a varchar type, but it doesn't need to be, because in Postgres, if the text value is underneath a certain size, it's automatically going to be stored, right there in the B tree node or whatever the terminology is. Whereas if it gets above a certain size, it's going to automatically be extracted into the toast table or what have you. Because you have different performance requirements for large strings versus small strings. So basically all that's to say, just make a text and you kind of don't really need to worry about it. Unless you explicitly want Postgres to limit the size to say under a certain number of characters, in which case you could use varchar, but it's actually better to just put a constraint on the column where, you say constraint size less than 64 or whatever the SQL magic for that would be. And actually, speaking of constraints, we can see here that we have a constraint. And this is a bit interesting, actually, because we're adding this constraint, which is a foreign key constraint on this column. And it's saying on delete, no action, on update, no action, which I would kind of rather have these cascade. And kind of what that would mean in this case is if the user is deleted, I want these I want the user's exercises to be deleted as well. Let's see if there's something to be said about that in the Drizzle docs. And a little bit of context there, kind of the reason that I want to do that is if the user, so like say for instance, you want to add functionality for the user to be able to delete their account and all of the data associated with their account. And this is something that, there might even be like a legal need to do that. I don't think it's really necessary for GDPR or anything like that, but as a user, it's nice to have. I've signed up for services where you're then not able to actually delete that account. And that's an annoying experience because you want to delete it, but you can't. Anyway, so I like to give users the ability to delete their account, but I don't necessarily want to have to run a million SQL queries to delete and remember to make sure to delete every single table of whatever might be referencing that user. So by actually having the onDelete cascade set up, then when that user record is deleted, all of the other things automatically get deleted as well, which is convenient. So let's see what this has to say about indexes and constraints, foreign key. And I don't need multi-column foreign key, of course. Doesn't really seem to have a lot to say about that. Foreign keys. Let's see, maybe this has some context. Foreign key actions. Yeah. So, oh, this is interesting. Okay, so basically the second parameter to the references function is an object. And in that object, you can have actions. And actions, or no, okay. It's actually just like this. The action is the key. So you would do like onDelete, cascade. Very good. And onUpdate, I don't even know what this onUpdate really does. Might as well cascade that as well. Maybe that means that if the user's ID is changed, then this foreign key value is also changed. I'm not totally sure. Okay, so we've done that. So now we want to regenerate this migration. I wonder, if I can just delete it and run the command again. Let's give it a shot. Delete, run it again. Are we happy? Fairly happy? On delete cascade, on update cascade. Okay, so now we've fixed our migration. Oh yeah, I've been forgetting to commit things. This happens to me. So let's commit these. Abstract. Let's just commit this first. So basically what this is going to be doing is abstracting shared HTML into template. Then this is switching sign in to using GitHub. And for that, we would also add this bit. And we can stage these selected ranges, basically staging these chunks specifically of that file, trying to make our commits a little bit sensible here, even though that ship is a little bit sailed already. And I guess that's pretty much it for now. Okay. And so then we can do these and we can say create new today route with enforced authentication. And then this would be add user foreign key to exercise table. And basically what we're committing here is the actual change as well as the migration and also these other things, which I don't know whether those matter. And then we have this business here. Now, I don't really want to commit these. So I'm actually going to exclude those in the git ignore. So this is going to be public main.js, public main.js.map. And so we do that. And now these should be excluded. Of course, they're already in there. So let's actually just delete those for now as well. We can safely delete them because, these are being generated automatically. Don't commit compiled JS. And so now if I go over here and rerun this, it should generate those files, but they don't show up in my source control list because they're being skipped. Okay. Awesome. And kind of as a point of context there as well, the reason that we're skipping these is because the compilation step is happening in our Docker file. So we don't need to compile these locally, and we don't want to have to compile them locally in order for the build to work. Instead, the actual build in the Docker file is going to compile this code, and it's going to compile it with different flags as well. It's going to use the minify flag instead of the source map flag. And so we're going to get a different compiled output. So this is just here for local development and doesn't need to be committed or pushed, and it doesn't need to end up in the actual, code that gets pulled into the Docker file in this step here. Speaking of which, this probably needs to go down here, right? We need to actually get the application code before we can build it. I haven't tested this part of the Docker file yet. Fix Docker file. Fix client build step in Docker file. Okay. So now, speaking of that, this might be a good time to actually try deploying this stuff. So let's see if we can deploy our latest changes without getting a bunch of errors or something. So we're going to do fly control deploy. And while that's going, we might as well get started on something else, because that's probably going to take a little bit of time. Although actually, let's see here. Seems to be almost done. The bun install step is so fast compared to Node. It did the thing. It deployed it. It successfully ran that. And so now if we actually open up this app, oh, we get an error. No file, OO2, add user to, I was a little bit worried about this. So Drizzle is doing some kind of magic here. I also just realized I forgot to run that command locally. Bun run migration run. Probably going to get the same error. So let's see, can we / should we just delete this and delete this? Or is this going to make Bun or Drizzle freak out? Let's see here. Yeah, as expected, it's freaking out. Constraint. Oh, see, so this is not what I thought it was. Okay, so let's actually restore these two. And get that migration back as well. Let me try something here. So first I'm actually going to turn off my stream for a moment because I'm not sure what this is going to do. I'm going to go in my trash and I'm going to restore that migration. And then I'm going to show my stream again. Okay. So now we've got that back in. I don't really like the fact that we have these two for the same thing, but sometimes that's just how migrations are. And so now column user ID of relation exercises contains null values. Yes, it does. We can fix that though. Delete and commit. Okay, migration's applied successfully. Unfortunately, this also means that we're going to have to do that in Fly in order for this migration to apply successfully there as well, which is annoying. So we kind of have a couple options for that. One option is we could sneakily edit this migration to truncate the table. Another option is we could go into Fly, like use something similar to what we did locally, where we connect with Table Plus or something to our production database in Fly. Well, I call it production, but our deployed database. But that's a bit of a pain, especially because I don't think there's a good way of doing that without pasting the password somewhere in the stream, which I don't really want to do. So I'm actually just going to try to kind of futz with this migration file here. Truncate exercises. Is that the syntax? I don't know. Let's see what... I've never used truncate, or very rarely used truncate. So truncate table name. So I would do truncate table exercises. And don't forget your semicolon. Right? Oh, no, well, this doesn't have table. Okay, then just do this. Truncate exercises. And hopefully that will fix it. So now if I do fly control deploy, let's see what happens. It's a bit faster this time, I think, because my builder container was already running. Kind of a bit of context about Fly, and one of the reasons that I like it, when you do fly control deploy like this, it actually pushes your code up to a remote Docker image builder that runs in Fly that's automatically created, and your image is built there. So you don't have to have, like, you don't have to worry about building that Docker image and then pushing it to some repository or registry from your actual computer. That all happens in the cloud. Okay, so let's see what happens if we open this. Oh yeah, it opens in the wrong browser window. Let me put that in Chrome here and see what we get. Bit slow going. It's not uncommon for the first time that you try to visit the app, because it has to be spun up on the fly, so to speak. But this is a bit slower than I would expect, which makes me think that we might be getting some kind of error. And indeed we are. Null value. Oh, so this is funny. This demo code that we have in here is actually not working anymore, because we're trying to insert, oh, and we even get a nice error here. We're trying to insert an exercise, but we've already said now that exercises have a user ID, which is required. And obviously this doesn't have that specified. And there's no really easy way to specify that here at all. So I'm just going to get rid of this whole example to begin with. And then we're going to commit both of these things as remove testing exercise that doesn't have a user, and deploy that. Okay. You know, one thing I'm kind of wondering about too, we have this better-auth secret here. But that's only used locally. I wonder what's happening in Fly. Do I have a secret for that set? I feel like I don't. And if I actually look at the fly.toml, I don't have an environment variable for it either. So I'm not really sure how that better-auth secret or what the better-auth secret is for the actual deployed app. Don't know if it even matters, actually, because that's probably used for username password auth in order to, I don't know, encrypt things or hash things or as a salt or something. I have no idea. But I don't know if it's needed for the social apps. Maybe it is. That's something that I might do off stream as well, just because I don't want to actually share the secret that I'm using for my deployed app here. In any case, if we kind of scroll down now, we should not see that error when we refresh the page. Oh, now there's just a plain old error. What's going on here? Oh, right. Bunch of stuff to fix. So what this is complaining about now, if we look here, this business, I think is what it's talking about. So it's evaluating exercise.name. This is selecting an exercise, but of course we don't actually have any exercises. So let's get rid of this. And then in the pug template, get rid of this. And in fact, get rid of all of this. And what I'm going to put here instead is just some placeholder. Okay, so let's actually test this locally before we deploy it. Bun run dev. Then if we check locally, so we're logged in locally, we're sent to today. Now, one kind of other thing here is like if I'm logged in, I can still go to the home page. But this home page is actually meant for logged out users. So one of the things that I can do here is I can put in another redirect where I can say if user res.redirect today. And I have to make sure to return that so it doesn't also try and call this render. And so now if I refresh this, it's actually going to send me to today. Then if I sign out, it sends me home. Cool. So let's commit these changes. Put some placeholder content in homepage. Also redirect to today if the user is logged in. Should that be a separate commit? Maybe. Do I really care that much? Not really. Okay. Refresh. So if we sign in, we go to today. If we sign out, we go back to the home page. If we try and go to today while we're signed in, we're sent to the home page. And if we try and go to the home page while we're signed in, we're sent to today. Right. Right. So now we can deploy this again. And let's actually, I seem to have lost my tab for the bun run client dev. So now we've got, the one tab for deployment, the one tab for our app server watcher, and the one tab for our client code watcher. And it's running the migrations, and then it's waiting for the migrations to be done. And then it's spinning up a new machine. So in Fly terms, a machine is kind of like a container, a virtual machine, or a pod in Kubernetes terms. But it's basically a lightweight virtual machine that can quickly be spun up and spun down. I believe it uses Firecracker under the hood. And kind of the idea is your app has one or more machines associated with it, which we can actually view over here. And you see this app actually has 2 machines, which we really don't need 2 of them. But Fly configures 2 automatically for high availability reasons. And then normally they're in this stopped state. But when an actual HTTP request comes in, the Fly proxy or whatever is going to start one of these machines. And once the machine is started, it's going to send that HTTP request to that machine. So the advantage of this is these machines, when they're scaled down, you're not paying for them. And that's one of the things that I really like about Fly, because if you have an app that's not getting a lot of requests, it doesn't cost very much money. I mean, to start with, these apps only cost something like $3 a month for a machine, even if it's running all the time, which is pretty cheap to begin with, cheaper than a DigitalOcean droplet. But the fact that it doesn't cost anything if it's scaled down and it automatically scales up, and then once it stops receiving requests for a certain amount of time, it automatically scales down, is great for these hobby apps for cost-saving reasons. And we can actually configure that in our fly.toml. You can see here it's got auto stop machines. And auto start machines, min machines running. And so one of the things here though, I actually am going to adjust the scale. So if I do fly control scale set 1, question mark, didn't like that. Scale count, fly control scale count 1. This is going to be scaled to, well, as it's saying, it's removing one of the machines. And so now one of those is gone. We only have the one machine. For a hobby app, this is the way I like to do it. Anyway, so you can see here, oh, actually there's a nice error here explaining you're getting the default secret. So kind of the idea for this then is if I do I have OpenSSL? Yes. So how to get out of that? What is the command for OpenSSL to generate a secret? I don't remember. Generate secret with OpenSSL. Basically, we're just generating a random string. OpenSSL rand hex 64. That's kind of long. 32. Something like that. And each time we run that, we're going to get a new value. And then what we can do is fly control secret set. What's the syntax for this? Oh, secrets. Set name equals value. So fly control secret set better-auth secret equals OpenSSL. Let's actually just copy the command from up here to make sure that we don't typo it. So what we're setting here is fly control secret set better-auth secret equals this hex string. And I think if I run this, it's not even going to tell you what it is. So I can do this even on stream, and that secret is going to remain a secret. And this redeploys the app. Now, the other thing that we're going to need to do, though, is set the social provider GitHub stuff. And I'm not actually going to do that yet because I don't really want to deal with it. There is, basically I need to create a new application config in GitHub because it's going to have a different authorization callback URL. So I can't reuse this exercise tracker dev. I need to create a new one. And not that big of a deal, but when I do that, it's going to reveal the secret. And I'm just going to hold off on doing that for now. The other thing is, usually I like to create a subdomain for these apps that's different from the one that's assigned by Fly. So this here is exercisetracker.fly.dev. If I refresh this, it'll work. If I try and sign in, I'm going to not be able to. But the page renders at the very least. But like something like this, like if this was exercisetracker.luketurner.org, then that's a domain that I own, and I can control what the app is called, the subdomain, without it being coupled to the app's name in Fly. I can also, host this app on a different service than Fly in the future if I want to, without having to change the URL that people use to access it. So in the long run, hosting these things under your own domain is definitely a good practice. Like a simple example here is if I go to dust.luketurner.org, this is another app that I built. And this app is also hosted on Fly. So when I did that request just there, it's going to spin up a LT-Dust app. And, I don't have to actually pay for that unless somebody's visiting the site. And then this also has login with GitHub functionality using a totally different auth framework, I might add, but works similarly. You can log in, you can add tasks, and this is a task tracking app. I'm not going to actually go into much detail about Dust, but just wanted to show you the subdomain approach that I like to use. Okay. Let's see, where are we at? So we've deployed our app. We haven't fully set up the social auth on the cloud, but we have it set up locally. One of the things that I'd kind of like to fix is this typing. So basically, because these are red, like the file name is red here, indicating that there's some kind of problem. And the problem is that these things implicitly have an any type. Now, if we look at the package.json, I have installed the express types library. The problem is that this is not smart enough to figure out that these are actually express functions, even if it's put directly into something like this. Like it really seems like the express types is not, it's either not very smart or it's not actually working. Also, let's get rid of these unused things. So, like this would be request from express. And this would be response from express, for example. The problem here, though, is we have this request object, but our middleware has actually put this user onto the request object. Right? This get session middleware is mutating request by adding session and user, but the express types don't know about that. So what we actually need to do is have something where it's like interface request with session, maybe extends request, and it's going to add a user which is going to be a user, I guess. And it's going to have a session, which is going to be a session, I guess. And both of these are going to be optional. So they might be there, they might not be there. And then these are going to use that. And basically by fixing these types, we're just getting rid of some of these errors. Because if you have too many type errors, well, besides the fact that your application won't actually compile, which isn't a problem because we're using bun, it causes noise. Like for instance, we had that compile error earlier where we were trying to insert an object into the exercises table, but it didn't have all of the columns. Normally that's something where TypeScript would be like, hey, you can't do that. And it was, but we didn't even notice because there were these other errors in the file. And so I just kind of was glossing over the fact that basically the file was red. And so we're going to do the same things over here. Now this, well, it's fine to leave it here, I guess. I'm going to put this up at the top of the file though, just for something. For some reason or other, it's at the top of the file now. And then we're going to import that over here. Actually, we don't even really need to, do we? So this is just a request. And this is a response. Actually, we will need to in a minute. And then this is a something or other handler. A next function. Yeah, something like that. And then we're going to do that exact same thing down here, except that this request is going to be a request with session. Request with session. And I guess this has to be a request with session too in order to even assign the values in the first place. Okay, so now we're, a little bit cleaned up on our types. Let's commit these. Type all or fix all TypeScript problems. So one other thing I'm wondering now is it possible to have bun not just casually run the app even if there's a compile issue? So if I have like bun run help, is there a way to enforce valid TypeScript? Not seeing anything really obvious. Let's actually look at the bun docs here real fast. Bun.js. Docs. TypeScript. Okay, so this is saying basically you have to actually use the official TypeScript CLI if you want to catch type errors, which is a bit of a pain. Because that's not necessarily going to be easy to do in the watch mode. but it is something that we're going to want to do just in general. So I think if I do tsc, it's not going to work. I have to install it. And I don't even have TypeScript. Well, TypeScript is a pure dependency. Let's see. Does this have anything to say about how you install TSC? Is it just npm install TSC? As expected, it's not. Use TypeScript. So is TypeScript not installed? It's listed as a pure dependency. It is installed. Okay, so the problem here then is when I type TSC here, TSC is not actually in the path, but it is present if we look up here in the node modules.bin, there should be a TSC. Yeah. And so we could call that explicitly, like node modules /bin/tsc. And that works. But we don't really want to have to do that. And instead, we can actually add a script here where it's like compile. And that can just run tsc. And the reason this works is because these scripts automatically have the node modules /bin folder added to the path when you run the script. So now if I do bun run compile, it's basically doing the same thing where it's running that tsc command and it works. And if I go over here and get rid of that, now we've got a TypeScript error. If I compile it, I should get an error message. Yep, very nice. So then what? One thing we want to now do is actually run that, compile server-side code. Just to ensure there's no compile errors. Run, run, compile. And this isn't actually necessary to start the app because bun is not running the compiled JavaScript. It's running the TypeScript itself directly. But we still want to do this just so that when we deploy the app, if there is some kind of compile error, it's not actually going to deploy. It's going to catch some of those things before it gets to the point of having your app live and getting a runtime error. Instead, we'll be getting compile time errors, even if it's just once the Docker image is pushed. Now, it would be nice to have this running locally as well, but the VS Code TypeScript integration is pretty good for that. As long as we actually pay attention to these problems when they show up and fix them all, we should be pretty much good to go when we actually deploy the app as well. Okay, so let's do this, compile, and I wonder where this compiled code is even going. So normally, like if I'm running tsc, what is that doing, It's not generating anything. Is it just checking? Because I really just want it to check. I want to I don't want to emit anything. There is a watch. That's kind of nice. We might end up using that at some point, but don't need to. So yeah, I don't know where that's emitting the file to. I mean, Is there a setting in here? Oh, there is. No emit, true. Okay, so what that's saying is when it runs the command, it's not actually going to emit anything, presumably, which is exactly what we want. So let's commit these. We can call it compile TypeScript before deployment. And then we can deploy this just to make sure that it works. By control deploy. And while that's happening, I'm going to take a moment to think about next steps here. So we have our app set up with 2 pages. We have the one page for logged in users, and we have the other page for logged out users, and they're both using a template. We've also allowed, or we've created a linkage between exercises and users. So an exercise would be something like pull-ups. It's not a specific instance of a session of pull-ups that a person's done. It's the general idea of the pull-ups exercise. So you could imagine on the today view, for instance, we would have something where it's like the user can view the exercises that they've done today, and they can also log a new exercise. And when they log a new exercise, they might have like a drop down to choose which exercise they want to add. And in that drop down, pull-ups would be an option. And they would say, well, I did 12 pull-ups. And then that would be logged as like a, I'm not sure exactly what to call it, an exercise action, a set maybe, a rep of that exercise, a set of reps. We need to kind of come up with a data model for that. And also we need to allow the user to actually create and manage their exercises. So say that pull-up exercise, the user needs to be able to say, hey, I want to track pull-ups. I'm going to create an exercise called pull-ups. Also, kind of as a side note, the reason that I have exercises as its own table instead of just like a string where the user could say, oh, I'm doing an exercise called pull-ups, is because maybe one day they call it pull-ups and maybe one day they call it pull-up. One day they put in a hyphen, one day they don't. And unless there's consistency there, we don't know how to correlate those exercises from day to day to say, well, you did 10 pull-ups yesterday, you did 12 pull-ups today, etc. But because we have pull-ups actually as a row in this exercise table, then we can confidently say these two sets on different days are both sets of the same exercise. And so we can correlate them. And if the user wants to rename that exercise, they can do so. And it's automatically going to, rename all of the past instances of that, like all of the other sets referencing that exercise will get that rename without needing to do anything fancy there. So basically by having this as a first class table, we're getting ourselves some benefits. And ultimately we might have other fields in here other than just name, like description, upper body, lower body, metadata about what type of exercise it is. Who knows? But the user would be able to fill that stuff out. Okay, so kind of the next step then is we need to add some interactivity. And doing a quick time check here. 1:40. So I kind of plan on going for about 2 hours, so we've got 20 more minutes. By the way, it looks like our app deployed successfully, which is great. So kind of what we want to do now is we want to define, or we want to give users the ability to define their exercises. So kind of the way that I'm going to do that is put a new thing here where if the user is signed in, then we're going to add just a link. And this link is going to be ref/exercises. So kind of the idea here is we don't want the user to have a form on the Today page to manage their exercises. The Today page should be focused on logging the sets that you've done today. We're going to have a separate page where the user can view and manage their exercise list as a whole. So that's what we're going to create right now. So let's make a new page, new file, just call it exercises.pug. And for now, I'm going to copy this and call this exercises. And so then we're going to need to define a new route for this as well. And this is also put into the authenticated router, so it's automatically going to have that same redirect functionality as the Today page without needing any additional code. And we're going to call this exercises. And this is going to be exercises. And this is going to be exercises. And kind of as a note here like this, there's probably a better way to do this because you'll notice that this title here is a bit redundant with this title here. So ideally we would either have this be like something like title, which doesn't seem like a bad idea. Or we could have the title be hard-coded into the template, which is fine. And then we would have another block, like block title exercises or something like that. But for now, I'm just going to leave it the way we have it. So we've got our exercises route, and this should really be all we need to get this route to start to render. And now we need a way for the user to actually navigate to it, which is what I was adding up here. So we have ahref exercises, manage exercises. And again, this is only showing up if the user is actually signed in. Okay, so let's see what this looks like. Refresh. So we don't see anything special here. We have to sign in. When we do sign in, we see that manage exercises link. If we click that, it takes us to exercises. One thing I'm noticing is that we don't have a link to go back to today. So let's add that as well. Now, there's no space between them, which is a little bit annoying. I wonder if I do that, does that? Does that work? No, Pug is not happy with that. How do I put a text node in Pug without plain text, without putting it into anything? With a dot, I guess. So this would be like dot. Does that work? Nope. Does that work? Yeah, that works. And this NBSP thing, it stands for non-breaking space. So that can be used if you're putting a space someplace where you don't want it to line break on that space, I believe is the intended purpose. But I'm just putting it in here because it looks and acts like a space, but it doesn't get stripped out by the template. Like if I were to just put a space here, a literal space, does that work? No, it doesn't work because it looks just like part of the indentation. And there's other solutions to this as well. Like maybe I could do like a JavaScript thing that returns the space, something weird. I'm sure there's a better option than that as well. And really in the long run, kind of the purpose for this is separating these two links visually. And that's something that ultimately we could do with CSS as well by adding a margin. But once we actually pull in a CSS framework like Bulma, these are automatically going to be rendered correctly with spacing between them. And so I'm just doing a simple solution for now to keep them separate. So we have today, we have manage exercises. And again, if we sign out and we go to /exercises, it redirects us back to the home page. So it doesn't actually try and render that page unless we're logged in. So what do we want this exercises page to do? Quick time check here. Okay, we got 15 minutes left. So what we want the user to be able to do here is see a list of their current exercises and ideally be able to edit or delete those, although we'll probably save that for later. And we also want them to be able to create new ones. So we're going to do, let's see what Copilot has to say about this. Render an unordered list of exercises. Good enough for me. And then, of course, we have to make sure that this exercises array is actually passed into the template. Even if it's empty, it has to be there. So here we're going to put exercises, and we're going to populate this using a drizzle query. Await exercise table dot something. I don't really remember the syntax for this. Let's see here. If we look back over here, we use db dot something or other. If we look over here, db.select from exercise table. That's the same syntax that we're going to want to use. So db.select exercise table dot from what? Why would I need a from? I've already said the table. Oh, okay. It's select and then from exercise table, like so, and then dot where. And this where is important here because we don't want all exercises. We just want ones where the user ID equals user.id, right? So what are you complaining about? So that should be user, where user. Okay, I don't really know how this works. Let's see if Copilot is going to help us at all here before I look at the docs. Select all exercises for the user. Okay, it's doing the same thing, except instead of using an object, it's passing two parameters, which doesn't seem to be right. So let's actually look at the drizzle docs, see what it has to say for itself. Drizzle. Select from users. Conditional select. What the heck? Oh, I see. So that's conditionally selecting the fields based on something or other. I think what we want is filters. So where, oh, this is this is not what I expected at all. Okay, so you would say where equals user ID user.id, right? So what are you complaining about now? Oh, so this is actually, okay, so this is exercises table dot user. That's interesting. And then this is saying user is possibly undefined. So here, actually, I'm going to fix this with a improved type. Request with guaranteed session. And so what this is going to be is extends user session. And so what this is saying is that these are no longer optional if we use this type. And the reason that we know that they're not optional is because we have this require session or redirect middleware in play, where the code is never going to get into this controller unless there's a user. And just in order to make sure that our types never fail us, we're also going to need to do if not request.user or not request.session. There should really be no reason to ever have a user without a session because we're assigning them both at the same time. But this is, just making sure that we're actually confirming that the runtime value reflects the exact type where neither of these are null or undefined. Okay, so let's actually just go ahead and commit that little bit. Commit this. And this. I guess I'll just commit the whole file. And then this other stuff is all, that's kind of a separate thing. So this is going to be create okay. And then we can go back to what we were doing. So we're looking up all the exercises for this given user. And just to pause here for a moment, this is what I was talking about a few sessions ago when I was talking about authorization. So here we have an authenticated user. The authentication is handled by better-auth and this get session middleware. And then now we need to authorize the user to view the exercises that they have permissions to view. So in this route, because we have this clause in the where statement or whatever, the user is only able to actually view the exercises that are associated with their user. In other words, they can only see the exercises that they're authorized to view. And you can see where having kind of a framework to handle this could be useful, because if somebody forgets to include this, especially say you can imagine if you're looking like where ID, it could be easy to forget that you also need to include the user as a clause here, because it's possible that the user for this session doesn't actually have access to exercise 1, 2, 3, and we need to verify that they do before we return it. So in this case, it's obvious, but as your queries get more complicated, it's going to become less obvious. Some of the frameworks that people use for this are basically resource oriented. So it's like, in this case, exercises is a resource. And you would use the authorization framework to say, okay, I'm looking up the resource for this user, for this session context, and it's automatically going to apply whatever where clause or whatever filtering needs to be done in order to make sure that the user can only see the exercises that they're authorized to view. You can also imagine, as this gets more complicated, like say we're doing that Fitocracy style model where exercises can be shared socially with others. You can create exercises like pull-ups, and then other users can also use that pull-up exercise instead of having to create their own, kind of crowdsourcing the definitions of these exercises. But maybe a user also has exercises that they don't want to be crowdsourced. So then this starts to become more complicated because we're looking up exercises where the user is user.id or where the user is something else and the shared flag on the exercise is true or something like that, the public flag. And as that authorization logic gets more complicated, you don't want to have to be copy pasting it between each SQL query. You need some kind of layer of abstraction to help you do that in a safe and not annoying way. But we're not really going to do that social stuff. We're probably going to have pretty simple authorization rules. And so for now, this is a pretty appropriate way to handle it. Anyway, so here we have for each exercise listed. Let's actually see what happens now. Sign in, manage exercises, and the page loads. There are no exercises, so of course it doesn't show anything in the list, but it's actually working without an error, which means that exercises is properly an array. And if we give the user the ability to add some exercises, then they'll be able to do so. So how do we do that? Well, basically with Express, we're going to need to define a post route. And we could do this in various ways, but I'm just going to have it post/exercises. And because this is on the authenticated router, again, if a user tries to do this post without having a user, it's not going to work. And so this is going to be a mutation. Let's just get rid of this for now. So what we're going to do here is const, or we can really just do await db.insert exercises table, exercises table, I can spell, values. And we're going to need to make sure to specify a name, which is going to be coming from the route itself. So like request.body.name. And the user is going to be user.id. And so one thing to note here is that this user is not something that the actual user controls. This value is coming from the server. So what we don't want to do is have this be rec.body.user or something like that, because that way the user could change the user ID if they were malicious and create users for a different ID other than themselves. But by using this user, which we have set on the server side in our middleware, we know that the user can only create exercises for themselves, which is important. But the name is something that the user controls. And so that's where here, we're probably going to do a little check. And, this is where I would like to pull in a kind of a Zod schema type of thing. Doing a quick time check though, we don't really have time for that. For now, I'm just going to do if not rec.body.name, then throw new error. Must specify a name. And kind of the nice thing about Express here is we're accessing this property on rec.body. Where does this come from? Well, it comes from a middleware that parses the body. So we don't actually have that defined anywhere. I don't know if we explicitly need to or not, but I think we do. So we can go ahead and put that in, say, right here, app.use, and we could do express.json to have a JSON parsing middleware. But actually, because we're going to be submitting these probably as a form from the browser, I think this would be better to do express. I believe it's called URL encoded. Let's check the Express docs real fast. Express.url encoded. Yeah. And so let's commit this and this and this. Add today page, or add manage exercises page. And so kind of the idea here is then under the exercises page, if we have a form, and this would be like /exercises. And then we could have a input text name. And what this is saying is we're creating an input with the ID of name, type of text, and the name, which is the name that this is going to be called in the URL encoded body. It's going to be the key is name. A little bit confusing, but this name is referring to the key. This name is the exercise name. So like if this was, this could also be like description if it was the exercise description. And then we also have a input submit. And I don't think it needs a value. And let's see how this looks. Also, let's do what this is saying. So what that's saying is it wants me to explicitly say whether or not I support the extended syntax. And I will, because why not? The extended syntax here is, it's basically letting you do URL encoded values where the key is an array or a nested object or something like that. Like over here, this could be like, say name was an object with first name and last name, which obviously doesn't make sense for an exercise, but you could do like name.first. And then over here, this would be like name.first. Which again, we don't actually need, but we might in the future. It allows you to do forms for complex objects. And then let's do add. Refresh. How do we... Okay, so that actually is that interesting. Okay, so if we say we want to add the exercise foobar, let's bring up our network inspector so we can see what this does. So we're making a post request here. Or actually we're making a get request. I'm going to change this to post. Method equals post. So now if we refresh, foobar, add. So now it's doing a post to exercises with the payload being a URL encoded form data, which we can tell by looking at the header here, content type header. And the name is foobar. So that should be getting down into the server here. Seems like it's not totally happy with it though for some reason. Let's try again. Add. So is this still pending? Yeah, why is it pending? Oh, because I don't have anything. So here I would do like res.send, or actually here I could do like res.redirect /exercises. Now I could do this render call again and basically copy all of this logic into the post, but instead I'm just going to actually redirect it back to that page. So now if I go exercises, today, manage exercises, created a bunch, because each of those requests where it was pending, it actually did this, but then it didn't refresh the thing. So now if I name this new exercise, for example, add, ta-da. So this is how the user will be able to create exercises in their app. And let's go ahead and commit this stuff as well. Okay. I think this is a good stopping point. Let's push this. And I guess that's it. Thanks, y'all. See you next week.